name is Alan Pelaez Lopez, and I am a January 2025 micro-resident at Savvy Contemporary, and I want to begin this space by sharing a poem titled Overalls. On a visit to my Ama's, she drives us to the DMV. She must renew her license every few months. The asylum case has not yet been approved. Not enough evidence that home is unsafe. The line is long. The DMV is inside a mall. In America, everything is for sale. Migrants pay for safety. We pay people to believe that what we tell them is true, especially when we have spared them from the hardest facts to hold. Immigration, DMV, school, and medical forums ask for our stories. We pay for our stories too. We pay in smiles, pretend laughs, head nods, empty stomachs, panic attacks reserved for elevators, migraines that will last for days but go unnamed, unuttered. After 38 or 40 minutes, we advance 7 or so people. And the Carter's window is visible from where Ama and I stand. Overalls. My heart races. My eyes begin to shake. The mall lighting hurts my eyes. I see 5 logos and know there is only one. I slam my back against the glass window. People look and pretend they don't. I try to find my inhaler. It's not in my pockets. I close my eyes. I think about a boy kissing a boy. I think about him more. I open my eyes and look for my mother. Avoid looking at the Carters again. The DMV does not renew the license. Something about an error or a glitch. A mother and migration. Maybe a mother and a child. At 5, I wore a pair of overalls. Crossed the border in them too. So this poem is about growing up undocumented in the United States and having to adapt to Americanity and move amid xenophobia, anti-Blackness, queerphobia, and just trying to make sense of what does it mean that a child border south of the country is labeled illegal? What does it mean that a Black person can be illegal just one border away when our lineage did not arrive to the Americas through a migration, but through the kidnapping and enslavement of Africans in what is now known as Mexico. So this is where my genealogy as an artist begins. Growing up undocumented meant never knowing if I was going to be deported at any moment. And I knew that stories were important. I was a young activist, a young organizer, and in the United States, I used my story to propel the social movements that I was part of, particularly the immigrant rights movement, the student immigrant movement, and the LGBTQ movement. However, I felt that my story was being taken away from me. And as an artist, as a storyteller, a lot of my work has been grappling with how do I reclaim my own narrative? And that's the reason why I began writing and also making visual work, especially collages and installations. It's incredibly difficult to explain to somebody what it's like to live as quote unquote illegal and as Black at the same time and as queer at the same time. And art was the place that I could do that. I never knew that I could have a career as an artist. And in the absence of a social security number, in the absence of a work permit, it was my art that allowed me to survive. I started making jewelry and selling it on the streets. And then I started performing and taking on these kind of gigs that just allowed from some type of substance. And after I got papers, which took about 20 years, it's when I was able to take on jobs full-time that allowed me to either be a writer or to be an editor or a curator, and really spend time on thinking and being about displacement at a global level, not just between the US and Mexico. I think this is a great question, the idea of how does my transdisciplinary work intersect and speak to one another. So as a creative writer, I try to, first of all, do research. The first memory I have of reckoning with the importance of stories was when I encountered a YouTube video of a West African migrant who had a silent video of flashcards telling his story, and each flashcard had a sentence about his migration, and essentially he was telling us that he was about to be deported from the country and asking us to uplift his story. And shortly after he published this YouTube video, you could no longer find the video, it was deleted. And that was when I realized the power not only of visuals, but also of the literary and the power of sound. The video was completely silent, but I could hear the disparity, I could hear the anxiety, the fear, and also I could hear the protest. And as a poet, I have been researching how is it that undocumented people in other countries, such as France, such as Germany, such as Mexico, the Dominican Republic, how are they resisting? And I try to write poems that are rooted in archives of migration. As a visual artist, there's very few memories that I have of my border crossing. I remember everything leading up to my border crossing. I don't remember anything about the day I crossed the border. I remember everything after the day I crossed the border. So I began to practice collage in order to ask myself, if I cut pieces together from my childhood, if I cut photographs of my family, if I cut photographs that remind me of Mexico, if I cut photographs of the San Isidro-Tijuana border, or photographs of San Diego, which is where I first crossed into the US, or photographs of Boston, which is where I migrated to, will I remember that day? I crossed by myself. That's considered an unaccompanied minor. So that's kind of how my collage practice developed, a deep desire to understand what is it that my body is protecting me from. And from there, I kind of created this practice of visuality, and then I incorporate text a lot in my work. And the text comes not only from me being a poet, but from the art of the protest sign. I think that protest signs are some of the most valuable and urgent pieces of art. And the protest sign oftentimes is not documented at a museum or at a gallery because it's seen as ephemeral. So for me, it's a way to make sure that I root myself in a material reality and not just in this genealogy of like, oh, fine art is something that needs your fingerprint. Fine art is something that requires training. For me, fine art is something that is undisciplinary, something that is speaking to the legal, social, cultural moment and actually does something for it. That's what, for me, art should be. And I think that anytime somebody makes, for example, a sign for a protest, that they enter into the role of the cultural producer, the role of the artist. And for me, that role is sometimes momentarily, sometimes it's forever. And as an academic, I try to teach about these histories, the history of writing from the position of illegality, from the position of being a refugee or an asylee. What does it mean to demand an audience when you don't legally have permission to be in a country? What does it mean to create when you come from a country where artists are disappeared? What does it mean to create when you're living in a country that is daily approaching things such as fascism, or approaching or experiencing an increase of violence against either migrant communities or queer and trans communities. So what does it mean as a scholar for me to not only create work, but to teach about the history of the law and how people respond to these legal structures? This is probably one of the most important questions anybody can ask me. When I was younger, I used to think that resistance was about complete revolutions. And as I age, what I learn is that resistance is about the everyday, the small things that we do in our lives to fight for our humanity and our agency. The first memory that I have of radical resistance is probably my mother putting on leather boots and going out dancing, and me kind of staying home alone while she was trying to go out. It was one of the rare nights that she would go out and really just live her life as a Black woman that the US empire labeled as illegal. For me, that was resistance, the leather boots. When I think about my friends who have survived solitary confinement and detention centers, especially my trans friends, when I think about the ways that they make makeup and how they use the shavings, the graphite of pencils to make eyeshadow and to make lipstick, for me, that is a form of radical resistance that transgresses the way in which the law tries to sequester us and to make us feel that we don't deserve to live. And for me, resistance also comes in the shape of kinship. I don't think that anybody can resist alone. In order to resist, you need to be part of a collective. You need somebody to witness your resistance. I was witnessing my mother's resistance when she was putting on her leather boots. I am witnessing the resistance of my friends who are incarcerated and arrogated by the police state when I call them, whether they be in prisons or jails or detention centers. When I visit them, I can witness that. For me, resistance is about coalition, and just having one person at least be there to see you move in these minute ways that claim back your humanity. I think about, there's a writer who I love, Jennifer Tamayo, who's originally born in Colombia, who migrated to the US, and she writes about being detained as a child. And a few years ago, a detention center near where she was detained illegalized the use of crayons because the government argued that children were destroying government property. And for me, that is a radical form of resistance, seeing a toddler take a grip to a crayon and just using it inside a center that forbids the migrant to imagine a life that is outside the realm of what the US says a life should be or what a migrant should be. And all of this requires love. My mother's love for dancing, my friends' love for reaffirming their beauty by using graphite to make makeup, and the children's love for color, the children's love for something else. There can be no resistance without love, no resistance without an understanding of what care and a collective might or could be. This question is really loaded because I think it's the question that all social movements need to be asked. How does your work speak to imperialism? So often in social movements, we are responding to either an event that happened or a law, and we think only about the present, and sometimes we fail to think about the past and how a lot of the violences we are experiencing are reoccurring violences or different rehearsals from empires. And for me, when I think about US imperialism, when I think about my work, I have to think about it now through a global context. When I first started making art, I thought that my struggle as Black and undocumented was really particular, and I didn't think about the ways in which Black people in other countries are also experiencing forms of imperialism and colonialism. I think about, for example, Okinawa, which is in a geography full of US imperialism. It is an Afro-Japanese geography that is Black precisely because of the US military. And now when I think about what does it mean to survive the US and imagine a Black future where Black folk who are impacted by the United States can live well, I have to think beyond the borders of the US. I have to think about places like Okinawa. I have to think about places like Puerto Rico, which is a heavily Black geography, and Puerto Ricans as colonial subjects. I have to think about places like Brazil, where when Trump was in presidency and he's about to be president again, and Bolsonaro was in presidency, we were seeing two forms of fascism holding hands, learning from one another, advancing agendas, and literally treating its Black populations, its trans populations, its disabled populations in the very similar ways, and imagining a total elimination of these communities, both in Brazil and in the United States. So when I think about my art practice, my scholarly practice, through the lens of US imperialism, I have to look beyond the US, and I have to engage not only a like transcontinental or hemispheric lens, but I really have to look at a global lens because the US has touched every continent, and I want to learn how people in other continents are touching the US back. And I want to become not only an artist and a writer, but I want to become a student of how other people globally demand accountability from the US. And for me, what's most important in a social movement is to be part of the collective, but also study with others what other people globally are doing, because it's the only way that we can really tackle these forces of imperialism, fascism, and governmentality. Lately, my influences include artists like Timi and Tineyatsi, who's a Dine artist, grew up in the Navajo Nation, and they work at the intersection of poetry, printmaking, self-publishing books, and also neon signs. They have an incredible image that reads every American flag as a warning sign. And for me, as an Indigenous art practitioner, studying other Indigenous art practitioners is really important, and Dimi Diniyati is one of them, who is also transdisciplinary. At the level of poetics, I think I'm a student of people like Sonia Guinyansaka, who is a formerly undocumented migrant from Ecuador, and they write a lot about what it means to mourn a land, what it means to refuse to see oneself as American, even if one has grown up almost their entire life in the United States, and what it means to fight back every single day for memory. So Sonia Guinyansaka is one of my major interlocutors, one of the people who I read. I listen to their YouTube interviews to really learn I'm also indebted to the work of people like Amy Césaire and Frantz Fanon, especially Amy Césaire's poetry and essays. I think Césaire was the first person who taught me that I could be an essayist. I never knew what an essay could do until I read his work. And it was also the first time where I said, oh, I can critique my country of birth while also not living in my country of birth. And I can also critique the country where I currently live in. And once I read Discourse of Colonialism, it was kind of like, oh, okay, I'm ready to talk shit about the US, to talk shit about my home country, and to really ask, what does it mean to imagine a world outside of nation states so that Black and Indigenous people can live well, so that we can address things like climate justice, so that we can address things like the end of white supremacy and the beginning of living outside of racial caste, and our obsession with identities. Because if white supremacy ends, if fascism ends, one of the beautiful things that will be born out of that is the end of identities, because it means that we'll finally have the sovereignty to our own bodies. So what guidance do I have for other art practitioners? I think that you just have to make. Make for yourself, make for what you are feeling, make for what your current present is. Don't feel this need that you have to make on behalf of someone or on behalf of a cause or on behalf of a social movement. Respond to the world that you are living in, and do it for yourself, because that's what matters. Eventually, people will find the work. And if it resonates with one person, that's great. If you just make it and never show it to anybody, that's also great. But the important thing is for you to make so you can archive what you are feeling, what you're experiencing, and what you are imagining. The other thing is allow your fear to be public. When you are afraid of something, let people know that you're afraid. If you're afraid either that your art is going to be received poorly, speak about it. Have conversations. What we need the most right now is conversations and different viewpoints. So don't be afraid to name your anxieties and your fears, because it's the only way that we can invite others either to be in communion with us, or it can also be a way to ask for mentorship, which is something that most of us who aren't trained, I have no training as a creative writer or as a visual artist. All of my training has been from other people who hear me talk about art or literature and hear my anxieties around it and kind of, take me under their wing or just send me recommendations. So don't be afraid to make or to name your fear, and also make for yourself. Don't make necessarily for a movement or for an audience. Start with yourself first and the world that you live in.